I'm Amber Wilson, 29, and for years I've been the family's designated punching bag. Last Thanksgiving, when I proudly walked into my parents' house with my homemade pumpkin cheesecake, my sister Madison loudly announced, "Here comes the cheapskate with another homemade dessert instead of buying something nice like a normal person." Everyone laughed. I felt my cheeks burn as I clutched my carefully crafted dessert. After years of her public humiliations, something inside me finally snapped. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been publicly embarrassed by a family member. To understand what happened that Thanksgiving Day, you need to know a bit more about me and my family. I've always been careful with money, but not because I'm stingy. 3 years ago, I made the final payment on my $50,000 student loan debt, which I'd been aggressively paying off since graduating from State University with my marketing degree. I did it by living frugally, tracking every expense, and being intentional with my spending. My apartment in Boston isn't fancy, a one-bedroom in a triple-decker in a transitioning neighborhood. But I've made it cozy with secondhand furniture, I've refinished myself, plants that thrive on my small balcony, and artwork created by friends. I drive a 2012 Honda that runs perfectly well. My wardrobe consists of quality basics that I mix and match. I have an emergency fund, contribute to my 401k. I even started a modest investment portfolio. Financial security brings me peace. Madison, on the other hand, lives a completely different life. My sister is 32, works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and projects an image of success that's impossible to miss. Her luxury condo in the trendy part of town features high-end furniture and the latest smart home gadgets. She drives a leased BMW, wears designer clothes exclusively, and takes Instagram-worthy vacations 3 or 4 times a year. She's always talking about her brunches at the hottest restaurants and the exclusive clubs where she knows the bouncers. From childhood, Madison was always seen as the golden child in our family. She's naturally outgoing, conventionally beautiful, and has that magnetic personality that draws people in. I was the quieter, studious one with my nose always in a book. My parents never meant to play favorites, but the pattern was established early. Our dad, Richard, is a retired high school principal who avoids conflict at all costs. He's the type to disappear into his workshop when voices get raised. Our mom, Diane, was always Madison's biggest cheerleader. She still has Madison's beauty pageant trophies prominently displayed but had to be reminded to frame my college diploma. Madison's habit of publicly putting me down started when we were teenagers and has never stopped. At my high school graduation party, she announced to everyone that I'd been rejected from my first choice college while she'd gotten into hers with a scholarship. But Amber's always been the practical one who settles, she added with a laugh. I remember the pitying looks from relatives as I tried to keep smiling. Then there was the Christmas gathering 5 years ago, when Madison loudly commented on my dress. "Oh, is that the same dress from last year? Or wait, is it from the thrift store?" Amber loves her secondhand stuff. The dress was actually a designer find I'd scored at a consignment shop, but explaining that would have sounded defensive. So I laughed it off while feeling like I wanted to disappear. The worst was probably at our cousin Emma's wedding 2 years ago. I'd come alone, having recently broken up with my boyfriend of 3 years. During the reception, Madison raised her glass and made a joke about me being perpetually single, and how the family had started a betting pool about whether I'd ever bring a date to family functions. Everyone laughed, including our parents. I spent 20 minutes crying in the bathroom stall before plastering a smile and returning to the party. My typical response to these humiliations was always the same: force a smile, maybe let out an awkward laugh to show I was a good sport, then find an excuse to step away. Often, I'd retreat to the bathroom, cry silently, fix my makeup, and return with a composed face. I'd learned to dissociate during these moments, to wash myself from above as if it were happening to someone else. It was a survival mechanism, but it left emotional scars that deepened with each incident. Not everyone in the family was oblivious to this dynamic. My cousin Rachel always gave me supportive glances during Madison's performances and would often find me afterward to check in. "You know her behavior says more about her than you, right?" she'd say, but it was hard to believe when the rest of the family seemed to find it so entertaining. 6 months before that fateful Thanksgiving, I started dating Jake, a high school history teacher who sees straight through Madison's act. He'd only met her twice, but after the second meeting, he asked me point blank. Has your sister always been this insecure that she has to tear you down? His observation startled me. I'd never thought of Madison as insecure. She seemed like the epitome of confidence. It was also around that time that I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Keller, to work through my anxiety and recurring depression. In one of our sessions, she asked me to describe how I felt during one of Madison's performances. As I recounted the familiar cycle of shock, embarrassment, hurt, and then numbness, Dr. Keller helped me recognize that I'd been conditioned to accept this treatment as normal. What would happen, she asked, if you didn't play your assigned role in this dynamic? That question had been rolling around in my mind for months. What would happen if I didn't smile and retreat? What would happen if I broke the script? Thanksgiving has always been a big deal in the Wilson family. My mom spends days planning the perfect menu, my dad cleans the house from top to bottom, and relatives drive in from several states away. This year, I'd volunteered to bring a dessert along with my traditional cranberry relish. I'd spent the previous evening in my kitchen, carefully crafting a pumpkin cheesecake with a ginger snap crust from scratch. The recipe was one I'd perfected over several attempts, adjusting the spice blend until it was just right. I'd even splurged on high-quality ingredients: real vanilla bean, organic pumpkin, and premium cream cheese. As I nestled it into a carrier for the drive to my parents' suburban home, I felt a mix of pride and anticipation. Maybe this would be the year Madison would let me enjoy a family gathering in peace. The morning was crisp and sunny as I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house. The radio played holiday music, and I sang along, trying to build up positive energy. I'd taken Dr. Keller's advice and had practiced some affirmations that morning. I deserve respect. My worth isn't determined by my sister's opinion. I can choose how to respond. When I arrived, the house was already bustling with activity. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Steve had driven in from Connecticut. Cousin Rachel and her husband were setting up games for the kids in the den. My dad was carving the turkey in the kitchen while my mom orchestrated the final touches on side dishes. The house smelled amazing: roasted turkey, sage stuffing, cinnamon, and coffee all mingling together. "Amber, honey, you're here." My mom wiped her hands on her apron and gave me a quick hug before turning back to the stove. "Just put your things anywhere. Madison's not here yet." I placed my contributions on the designated table, arranging my cheesecake next to Aunt Patricia's apple pie and Uncle Steve's store-bought cookies. The table looked festive with my mom's autumn-themed centerpiece and the good china we only used for holidays. For about an hour, everything was pleasant. I helped in the kitchen, chatted with relatives about work and life in Boston, and played with my second cousin's toddler. Then came the distinctive sound of a luxury car pulling into the driveway, followed by the click of high heels on the front porch. Madison made her entrance like a celebrity arriving at a premiere. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair freshly highlighted and blown out. In one hand she carried a bag containing several bottles of expensive wine. In the other, a bakery box tied with gold ribbon. "The party can start now," she announced, air-kissing relatives as she made her way through the living room. Our mother immediately abandoned the gravy she was stirring to embrace Madison. "Those shoes are to die for," Mom exclaimed, admiring Madison's red-soled stilettos. "Just a little something I picked up last week," Madison said with a practiced nonchalance. "Oh, and I brought dessert from that French bakery downtown, the one with the 3-month waiting list for custom orders. But I know the owner, so," she trailed off with a little shrug that managed to convey both false modesty and a reminder of her social connection. She placed her bakery box on the dessert table and looked at my cheesecake with an exaggerated expression of recognition. "Amber, another homemade dessert, how consistent," she said, her voice carrying across the room. Then came the fatal line. "Here comes the cheapskate with another homemade dessert instead of buying something nice like a normal person." The room didn't exactly fall silent. Conversations continued around us, but several relatives within earshot paused and looked our way. Some smiled awkwardly. Others pretended not to hear. "Some people actually appreciate homemade food," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice light. "Of course they do, sweetie," Madison replied in a tone one might use with a child. "Just like they appreciate your secondhand car and your thrift store clothes. It's so practical." She emphasized the word practical as if it were synonymous with pathetic. Then she raised her voice slightly, ensuring more people would hear. "But seriously, would it kill you to splurge once in a while? You're like the poster child for extreme budgeting. I'm surprised you didn't bring a calculator to track how much turkey you eat so you can reimburse Mom." Several people laughed, not maliciously, but in that uncomfortable way people laugh when they're not sure how else to react. Aunt Patricia shot me a sympathetic glance. Cousin Rachel frowned and started walking toward us, but Madison had already moved on to greet someone else, leaving me standing alone next to the dessert table, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I felt the familiar cascade of emotions: the initial shock, the hot flush of humiliation, the tightness in my chest, the prickling behind my eyes. On autopilot, I excused myself and headed for the downstairs bathroom. Once inside, I leaned against the door and took several deep breaths, trying to steady myself. As I splashed cold water on my face, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Same brown eyes, same wavy hair pulled back in a simple style, same person I'd always been. But something felt different this time. Dr. Keller's question echoed in my mind. What would happen if you didn't play your assigned role in this dynamic? What would happen, indeed? A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Amber, it's Rachel. You okay?" I opened the door to find my cousin looking concerned. I heard what Madison said. That was really out of line. "It's fine," I said automatically. "I'm used to it." Rachel frowned. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't be used to being treated that way. No one should speak to you like that, especially not your sister." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, genuinely wanting an answer. "If I say anything, I'm being too sensitive. If I don't, it just keeps happening." "Maybe it's time to break the pattern," Rachel suggested. "You're always so worried about making a scene, but Madison clearly doesn't share that concern. You don't have to be mean about it, but you can stand up for yourself." As we talked, a clarity began to form in my mind. This pattern would continue indefinitely unless something changed. And since Madison showed no signs of changing her behavior, and my parents had never intervened, the change would have to come from me. "You're right," I said finally. "This has gone on long enough." Rachel gave my arm a supportive squeeze. "Whatever you decide to do, I've got your back." I took one more look in the mirror, straightened my shoulders, and made a decision. The script was about to change. By the time everyone gathered around the dining table, I had composed myself. The large oval table was beautifully set with the good china, crystal glasses, and the silver that had belonged to my grandmother. The turkey sat at one end, golden brown and fragrant, serving dishes filled with stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, cranberry sauce, both my homemade relish and the canned gelid type my dad preferred, and fresh rolls crowded the center of the table. I took my usual seat between Aunt Patricia and Cousin Rachel's husband, directly across from Madison, who was already pouring herself a glass of the expensive wine she'd brought. Mom always gave Madison the seat closest to her own, just as she'd done since we were children. The meal began pleasantly enough with Dad saying grace and everyone passing dishes around. Conversation flowed easily. Uncle Steve talked about his golf game, Aunt Patricia described her volunteer work at the animal shelter, and Cousin Rachel shared funny stories about her kindergarten student. I was starting to think that perhaps the earlier incident would be the extent of Madison's behavior for the day, but I should have known better. As we were discussing holiday plans, Madison deftly steered the conversation toward my relationship with Jake. "So Amber," she said between delicate bites of turkey, "I notice your budget boyfriend isn't here today, couldn't afford the gas to drive over." I felt the table's attention shift to me. Jake had wanted to come, but couldn't because he was helping his recently divorced sister move into a new apartment with her kids. We'd agreed he would join my family for Christmas instead. "Jake is helping his sister today," I explained calmly. "He's looking forward to meeting everyone at Christmas." "How convenient," Madison said with a smirk. "Does he even exist, or is he like that Canadian girlfriend boys used to claim they had in high school?" Some uncomfortable laughter rippled around the table. Mom glanced at Madison with a slight frown but said nothing. "Jake is very real," I said, my voice steady. "He teaches history at Westfield High and coaches their debate team. They made it to state finals last year." "A teacher, how noble," Madison replied, her tone making it clear this was not a compliment. "I guess that explains the budget lifestyle. Does he drive a used car too? You two must be quite the frugal power couple." Something inside me clicked into place. This was the moment. "You know, Madison," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you keep using words like budget and cheapskate as insults, and I'm wondering why you think being financially responsible is something to be ashamed of." The table went quiet. My mother looked alarmed, my father suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes, and everyone else seemed frozen in place. Madison looked startled for a split second before recovering with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." "I don't think it's very funny," I continued, maintaining eye contact with her. "There's nothing wrong with living within your means and being thoughtful about how you spend your money. Actually, I'm proud that I paid off my student loans while building savings. I'm proud that I can distinguish between needs and wants. And I'm proud that I don't measure my worth or other people's by how much they spend." Madison's expression hardened. "Well, aren't you just perfect then, Saint Amber, so virtuous with her coupons and her secondhand everything?" "I'm not claiming to be perfect," I replied. "I'm just asking to be treated with basic respect. The constant digs about my spending habits aren't jokes because they're not funny, they're just mean. And I'm done pretending they don't hurt." My mom finally found her voice. "Girls, please, it's Thanksgiving, let's not." "No, Mom," I interrupted gently but firmly. "This needs to be said. For years, I've smiled and walked away when Madison publicly humiliates me. Not anymore. I deserve better than that, especially from my sister." Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. "God, you are so oversensitive. It's called teasing. Families tease each other." "Right, everyone." She looked around the table for support, but was met with uncomfortable glances and averted eyes. "There's a difference between good-natured teasing and consistently targeting someone's insecurities," I said, "and you know exactly where that line is." Madison's cheeks flushed with anger or embarrassment, maybe both. "This is ridiculous. I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of nothing. Typical Amber drama." "It's not nothing to me," I said simply. "And I don't think I'm being dramatic by asking to be treated with respect." Madison pushed her chair back with enough force to make the crystal glasses shake. "I need more wine for this," she muttered, heading toward the kitchen. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My heart was pounding, but for the first time in years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had finally spoken my truth, calmly and clearly. My father cleared his throat. The Patriots have a good chance this year, don't you think, Steve?" he asked my uncle, desperately trying to change the subject. As conversation awkwardly resumed around me, Rachel gave my hand a supportive squeeze under the table. The dinner continued, but Madison didn't return for several minutes, and when she did, the tension was palpable. She avoided looking at me directly, instead focusing her attention on our mother and Aunt Patricia, making a show of enjoying her meal despite the unnecessary drama. I ate my turkey and stuffing in a state of calm resolution. The confrontation wasn't over, I could feel it, but something had changed. For the first time in our adult lives, I had refused to play my assigned role, and Madison didn't quite know how to proceed without my compliance. The script had been altered, and we were now in uncharted territory. After dinner, as everyone dispersed to the living room for football or to the den for board games, I saw Madison slip into the kitchen alone. This was my chance for a more private conversation. I took a deep breath, excused myself from a conversation with Uncle Steve about his new fishing boat, and followed her. The kitchen was warm and smelled of turkey and pumpkin pie. Madison was standing at the counter, pouring herself another generous glass of wine. She stiffened when she heard me enter but didn't turn around. "Madison," I began, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard, "I'd like us to talk about what happened at dinner." She turned to face me, wine glass in hand. "What is there to talk about? You made a scene and embarrassed me in front of everyone." Her voice was cold, defensive. "That wasn't my intention," I said, leaning against the opposite counter to give her space. "But I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself." Madison took a long sip of wine, studying me over the rim of her glass. "When did you get so confrontational? You never used to be like this." "I'm not being confrontational, I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." She scoffed. "Boundaries? Did your therapist teach you that word? Mom mentioned you've been seeing someone." I felt a flicker of anger at the invasion of privacy but kept my composure. "Yes, I've been working with a therapist, and it's been really helpful. One of the things I've learned is that it's okay to tell people when their behavior." "So this is all about your feelings," Madison said, her tone dismissive. "You've always been so sensitive." "This is about mutual respect," I corrected her. "Madison, we're adults now. The way you spoke to me earlier, the way you often speak to me in front of others, it's hurtful and unnecessary." I'm asking you as my sister to stop. Something flashed in Madison's eyes, anger, certainly, but also something else. Vulnerability, perhaps. She placed her wineglass down with enough force that some of the red liquid sloshed over the rim. You've always been jealous of me, she said, her voice rising slightly. Ever since we were kids. Now you have a problem with my behavior because you can't stand that I'm successful and happy while you're stuck in your little budget life with your t-shirt boyfriend. The accusation was so far from reality that I almost laughed. Jealous? Madison, I've never been jealous of you, different from you, yes, sometimes hurt by you, definitely. But never jealous. Please, she scoffed. I see how you look at me when I talk about my trips or my condo or my job. You think I don't notice the judgment. If you see judgment, you're projecting, I said calmly. I don't judge your lifestyle choices, I just want you to stop judging mine. Madison's laugh was bitter. Oh, that's rich. Saint Amber doesn't judge anyone, does she? So perfect with her debt-free, minimalist lifestyle. You think you're better than me because you pack your lunch and drive a car from the last decade. I don't think I'm better than you, I insisted. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We've made different choices, but that doesn't make either of us better or worse. Right, different choices, Madison said, her voice taking on a strange, tight quality. Well, some of us don't have the luxury of being so practical. I frowned, confused by her wording. What do you mean, luxury? Everyone can choose to live within their means. Madison's eyes suddenly welled with tears, taking me by surprise. In all our adult conflicts, I'd rarely seen my sister cry. She turned away quickly, facing the sink, her shoulders rigid. Madison, I asked, uncertain now, what's going on? Nothing's going on, she snapped, but her voice cracked. Just leave it alone, Amber. I moved closer, still maintaining some distance. Clearly something's wrong, talk to me. For a long moment, there was silence except for the distant sound of the football game on TV and children laughing in another room. Then Madison's shoulders slumped. You want to know the truth, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth is I'm drowning. What do you mean? She turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears streaming down her face. I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. Credit cards, personal loans, my car payment that I can barely make each month. All of it. I stared at her, struggling to process this revelation. But, your job, your condo, all the trips and clothes and… It's all a house of cards, she interrupted. My base salary isn't nearly what people think. The commissions have been terrible since they restructured our territories last year. I've been putting everything on credit, taking out cash advances to pay minimum balances on other cards. She laughed bitterly. That fancy bakery dessert I brought today. I couldn't even afford it. I had to return a pair of shoes to buy it. I felt like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. Why didn't you say anything, to me, to Mom and Dad? And admit that perfect Madison is a fraud, she wiped angrily at her tears. That I'm one missed payment away from bankruptcy at 32. That's not exactly the image I've created, is it? But why create that image at all? Why put yourself through that? Madison looked at me with genuine bewilderment. Because it's who I am, it's who I've always been, the successful one, the one who has it all together. What would I be without that? Suddenly, so many things clicked into place: her defensiveness, her need to put down my lifestyle, her increasingly lavish displays of wealth as her financial situation deteriorated. You'd be my sister, I said softly. That's enough. Madison's face crumpled, and to my shock, she began to sob deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere long buried. Without thinking, I moved forward and wrapped my arms around her. For a moment she stiffened, but then she collapsed against me, crying into my shoulder like we were children again. I don't know what to do, she admitted between sobs. I'm so scared, Amber, I could lose everything. We'll figure it out, I promised, rubbing her back. You're not alone. Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and our mother walked in. She froze at the sight of Madison sobbing in my arms. What on earth is going on in here? She demanded, rushing toward us. Amber, what did you do? Before I could answer, Madison pulled back and faced our mother. She didn't do anything, Mom. We were just talking, and… She took a shuddering breath. And I need to tell you and Dad something. Within minutes, the kitchen had become the center of an impromptu family meeting. Dad was summoned from the football game, and Madison, still wiping tears, began to explain her financial situation to our shocked parents. The details were worse than she'd initially let on. Nearly $75,000 in credit card debt alone, multiple personal loans, and she was 3 months behind on her car payments. Mom's face seckled through expressions of disbelief, horror, and finally, a mother's concern. Dad kept asking detailed questions about interest rates and minimum payments, his former math teacher instincts kicking in. As the conversation unfolded, other relatives drifted in and out of the kitchen, sensing that something significant was happening. Rachel lingered by the door, giving me supportive looks. Aunt Patricia offered to take the children out for ice cream to give us privacy. Throughout it all, I stood by Madison's side, occasionally adding a supportive comment or suggestion. I explained how I'd managed to pay down my own student debt, offered to help her create a realistic budget, and suggested resources that might help. But Madison wasn't really listening anymore. As the reality of her confession sank in, she seemed to withdraw into herself. When Dad started talking about possibly selling her condo, she suddenly pushed back from the table. "This was a mistake," she said, her voice hollow. "I shouldn't have said anything." "Madison, honey, we're just trying to help," Mom said, reaching for her hand. Madison pulled away. "I don't need a family intervention. I'll figure it out myself." She grabbed her purse from the counter. "I should go." "Don't leave like this," I pleaded. "We're just getting to an honest place." "Honest?" she laughed bitterly. "Now everyone knows what a failure I am. Happy Thanksgiving." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen. Moments later, we heard the front door slam and the sound of her car starting. Mom looked at me accusingly. "What exactly did you say to her?" And just like that, I was back in the familiar role of being blamed for Madison's behavior. But this time, I wasn't accepting it. The rest of Thanksgiving evening was strained, to say the least. After Madison's dramatic exit, the family splintered into informal factions. Mom was distressed and kept checking her phone, sending unanswered texts to Madison. Dad retreated to his workshop, his traditional escape route from family tension. Uncle Steve and his sons resumed watching football in the living room as if nothing had happened, while Aunt Patricia quietly organized the cleanup in the kitchen. Cousin Rachel and her husband stayed close to me, providing a buffer of support as various relatives approached with questions or comment. "What happened with Madison? Is she okay? Has she always been in financial trouble? I thought she was doing so well in her career." I answered as diplomatically as possible, protecting Madison's privacy while acknowledging that yes, there had been a family disagreement, and no, everything wasn't fine, but we were working on it. It was exhausting. Around 8 o'clock, as guests were preparing to leave, Mom cornered me in the hallway outside the guest bathroom. "I need to understand what happened today," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Your sister has never broken down like that at a family gathering. What exactly did you say to her?" I leaned against the wall, suddenly very tired. "I didn't attack her, if that's what you're asking. We were having an honest conversation for the first time in years, and she told me about her financial problem." "You must have said something to provoke her," Mom insisted. "Madison doesn't just fall apart for no reason." The familiar pattern was unfolding. Madison acts out, Madison gets defended, Amber gets blame, but I was no longer willing to play along. "Mom," I said gently but firmly, "have you considered that maybe Madison has been struggling for a long time and none of us noticed because we were all too busy maintaining the image of her as the perfect, successful daughter?" Mom blinked, taken aback. "That's not fair, we've never put that pressure on her." "Haven't we? Haven't you?" I challenged. "Every time she brought home an expensive gift or talked about some exclusive event, you'd beam with pride. Every time she put me down to make herself look better, you let it slide." The pattern was clear. Madison is the star, and I'm the sensible, boring supporting character. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "That's not how I see you girls at all." "Maybe not consciously," I conceded, "but our family dynamic has been reinforcing these roles for decades. And look where it's gotten us. Madison is in financial ruin trying to maintain an image, and I've spent years swallowing my feelings to keep the peace." Dad approached, likely drawn by the intensity of our conversation. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice cautious. "We're discussing how the family has different expectations for Madison and me," I explained. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think that's entirely fair, Amber." "Isn't it?" I asked. "When was the last time either of you stepped in when Madison was putting me down? When have you ever called her out on her behavior toward me?" They exchanged glances, and in their silence, I found my answer. "That's what I thought," I said. "We didn't want to make a scene," Dad explained weakly. So instead, I was expected to absorb the humiliation to keep everyone comfortable, I replied. That stops now. I love you both, but I'm done being Madison's punching bag and everyone's peacekeeper. Mom wiped a tear from her cheek. I never realized you felt this way. Why didn't you say something before? I've tried, in my own quiet way. But it's hard to be heard in this family unless you're making a scene, which is exactly what Madison has always done. Dad put his arm around Mom's shoulders. We've made some mistakes, he admitted, surprising me with his candor. With both of you, I'm sorry we didn't see what was happening. His apology, simple as it was, helped dissolve some of the tension I'd been carrying for years. Thank you for saying that, Dad. As the last of the relatives departed with leftover containers and awkward goodbyes, I called Jake from the privacy of my old bedroom. Sitting on the twin bed with its faded floral comforter, I filled him in on everything that had happened. That sounds intense, he said when I finished. Are you okay? Strangely, yes, I replied, realizing it was true. It was uncomfortable and messy, but it also felt necessary, like lancing a wound that's been festering for years. I'm proud of you, Jake said warmly. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially with family. I'm worried about Madison though, I admitted. She was so upset when she left. I've texted her, but no response. Give her time, Jake advised. She's probably embarrassed and needs space to process everything. After we hung up, I went downstairs to find Rachel waiting for me in the kitchen. Most of the cleanup was done, but she was nursing a cup of tea at the counter. I stayed back to check on you, she explained. That was quite a Thanksgiving. I smiled ruefully. Not exactly what I had planned. Are you kidding? That was long overdue, Rachel said with unexpected vehemence. Look, I love Madison, but the way she's treated you for years has been awful. I'm glad you finally stood up for yourself. Thanks for having my back, I said, genuinely grateful for her support. Always, she promised, giving me a hug. By the way, your cheesecake was amazing. Better than that fancy bakery thing Madison brought. That made me laugh, releasing some of the tension I'd been carrying all day. After Rachel left, I helped my parents with the final tidying up. The conversation was subdued but not hostile. Mom asked about Jake and seemed genuinely interested in hearing more about him. Dad inquired about my job and actually listened to my explanation of the marketing campaign I was managing. Small steps, but meaningful ones. When it was time for me to leave, Mom hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, Amber, she whispered. I'll do better. The drive back to Boston was surreal. My mind replayed scenes from the day, examining them from different angles. Madison's mocking comment about my cheapskate ways, my calm but firm response at dinner. The shocking revelation of her financial troubles, her tears, her exit. The confrontation with my parents. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt emotionally wrung out but also strangely peaceful. For years, I'd feared that confronting these family dynamics would destroy my relationships. Instead, it felt like the first step towards something more authentic. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and curled up on my couch, surrounded by the cozy home I'd created on my budget. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for or justify my lifestyle choices. They were mine, they worked for me, and they reflected my values. As I drifted off to sleep that night, one thought kept surfacing. Whatever happened next with Madison and my family, the old pattern was broken. We could never go back to the way things were, and that was probably for the best. The week after Thanksgiving passed in a blur of work deadlines and holiday marketing campaigns. My company was launching a major promotion for the holiday shopping season, and as the coordinator for social media strategy, I barely had time to think about family drama. Perhaps that was a blessing. I'd send Madison a few text messages, nothing pushy, just letting her know I was thinking about her and available when she was ready to talk. No response. Mom reported similar radio silence, though she'd driven by Madison's condo and confirmed her car was there, which at least provided some reassurance. It was the following Wednesday, nearly a week after Thanksgiving, when the unexpected happened. I was at my desk, reviewing engagement metrics on our latest campaign, when my office phone rang. Amber Wilson, marketing, I answered distractedly, eyes still on my computer screen. Amber, it's me. I immediately recognized Madison's voice, though it lacked its usual confidence. Madison, hi, I'm glad you called. I tried to keep my tone neutral, not wanting to spook her with too much enthusiasm or concern. Are you free for coffee after work? I'm down now for a meeting and thought maybe, she trailed off uncertainly. Yes, absolutely, I said, surprised but pleased. Café Lumen at 5:30. That works, she replied, then added hastily, I can't stay long though. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, processing. Madison had reached out, that was significant, but I tempered my expectations. One conversation wouldn't magically fix years of dysfunction. Café Lumen was a cozy spot halfway between my office and the financial district where Madison's meeting was located. I arrived a few minutes early and secured a quiet table in the corner, away from the after-work crowd at the counter. When Madison walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. On was the designer outfit and perfect blowout. Instead, she wore simple black pants, a gray sweater, and minimal makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked tired. Vulnerable in a way I rarely saw her. She spotted me and made her way over, sliding into the chair across from mine. Thanks for meeting me, she said, placing her phone face down on the table, another uncharacteristic move for someone usually glued to her screen. Of course, I replied. Do you want to get a coffee first? She glanced at the line at the counter. Maybe in a bit. I wanted to. Well, first I should. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry for how I behaved at Thanksgiving. The things I said to you, storming out like that. It was childish. Her apology, awkward as it was, seemed sincere. Thank you for saying that, I said. I appreciate it. Madison fidgeted with a sugar packet from the table caddy. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about our dynamic, about my behavior toward you. You were right. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I've been awful to you, haven't I? The question seemed genuine rather than rhetorical, so I answered honestly. At times, yes, it's been hurtful. She nodded slowly. I don't have a good excuse. I could blame it on competition or insecurity or whatever, but the bottom line is I was mean to you because it made me feel better about myself. And that's pretty terrible. I wasn't used to this level of self-awareness from Madison. What changed? I asked gently. Reality crashed down on me, I guess, she gave a humorless laugh. After I left Thanksgiving, I drove around for his, thinking about everything. About the mess I've made of my finances, about how I've treated you, about the fact that despite all my showing off, you're actually the one who has it together. Madison. She held up a hand. Let me finish. I'm not saying this to get sympathy. I've made my own choices, but seeing how you've managed your life, being careful with money, making thoughtful decisions, I realize I could learn a lot from you. She swallowed hard. If you're willing to help me, that is. I was stunned. In all our years, Madison had never asked for my help with anything. What did you have in mind? I need to get my finances under control before I lose everything, she said bluntly. I don't even know where to start. Credit counseling, maybe, bankruptcy. I'm completely out of my depth. I'm not a financial advisor, I cautioned, but I can definitely help you make a plan, budget basics, debt prioritization, that sort of thing. That would be really helpful, Madison said, her voice small. I know I don't deserve your help after how I've treated you. You're my sister, I said simply. Of course I'll help you. We decided to get our coffees, then a regular latte for me and, notably, a plain coffee for Madison rather than her usual complex specialty drink. As we returned to the table, the conversation shifted to practical matters. Madison shared some specifics about her debt situation, and I asked clarifying questions, jotting down notes. The first step is getting everything on paper, I explained. Every debt, every expense, every source of income. We need the complete picture before we can make a plan. Madison nodded, taking it in. Could we maybe do this at your place sometime? I'd invite you to mine, but, she hesitated. I might not have it much longer. I'm looking at listing the condo before it goes into foreclosure. Of course, I agreed. How about Saturday morning? I could make breakfast, and we could work through it together. That would be great, she said, seeming genuinely relieved. Then she added, just don't expect too much from me at first. I've never been good with this stuff. Numbers make me anxious. We'll take it slow, I assured her. No judgment, I promise. As we were preparing to leave, Madison asked an unexpected question. Your apartment, what's it like? Mom always makes it sound like you live in a shoebox. I smiled. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable. It's a one-bedroom in a triple-decker in Jamaica Plain. Good natural light, walking distance to the T, lots of character. Sounds nice, she said, and seemed to mean it. I've never actually seen where you live, have I? That's pretty terrible. Well, you'll see it on Saturday, I replied. We said goodbye on the sidewalk outside the cafe with a somewhat awkward hug. Neither of us had been huggers with each other as adults. As I watched Madison walk toward the parking garage, her shoulders slightly hunched against the December chill, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also caution. One coffee meeting didn't erase years of difficult history. Yet it seemed like a genuine beginning. That Saturday morning, I woke up early to tidy my apartment, though it didn't really need it. Keeping things neat and organized was part of my nature. I made a simple breakfast of whole grain waffles, fresh fruit, and coffee, nothing elaborate but nourishing and homey. Madison arrived precisely at 9, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, another departure from her usual style. She seemed hesitant at the doorway, looking around with curious eyes. "Come in," I encouraged. "Tour first or breakfast?" "Tour, please," she said. "I want to see this place you've created." I showed her around my small but well-designed space. The living room with its comfortable second-hand sofa and armchair that I'd roof-upholstered myself. The kitchen with its modest appliances but excellent organization. The bedroom with its DIY headboard made from an old door I'd refinished. The small balcony where I grew herbs and tomatoes in season. "It's really lovely," Madison said, and she sounded sincere. "It feels like you, thoughtful and warm." "Thanks," I replied, genuinely pleased by her reaction. "It's not big, but it's exactly what I need." Over breakfast, Madison opened up further about her financial situation. She'd brought bank statements, credit card bills, and loan documents in a disorganized folder. Together, we spread them across my dining table and began sorting through them. "I'm almost afraid to look," she admitted, staring at the papers. "I've been avoiding the full picture for so long." "It's just information," I reassured her. "Once we know what we're dealing with, we can make a plan." The reality was sobering. Between the mortgage on her underwater condo, car payments on her leased luxury vehicle, credit card debt with astronomical interest rates, and personal loans, Madison was over $120,000 in debt beyond her student loans. Her monthly obligations exceeded her income by nearly $200,000, and she'd been covering the gap with cash advances and new credit cards, a financial death spiral. "How did I let this happen?" she whispered, staring at the spreadsheet we'd created. "One decision at a time," I said gently. "But we can turn it around the same way." I walked her through some immediate steps, calling creditors to negotiate interest rates, prioritizing which debts to tackle first, creating a realistic budget based on her actual income. I showed her the budgeting app I used and helped her set it up on her phone. "I use this every day," I explained. "It's not about depriving yourself. It's about being intentional with your money so it goes toward what really matters to you." "I don't even know what matters to me anymore," Madison confessed. "I've been so focused on appearances for so long." This vulnerable admission touched me. That's something to explore too. What actually makes you happy versus what you thought would make you happy. We took a break around noon, and I made us sandwiches for lunch. As we ate, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. "Can I ask you something?" Madison said hesitantly. "Have you always hated me? For how I've treated you?" I considered the question carefully. "I've never hated you, Madison. Been hurt by you, yes, been angry, definitely. But hate, no, you're my sister." "I think somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that you were judging me," she admitted. "That you thought you were better than me with your careful spending and practical choices, so I lashed out first, before you could point out my mistake." "I wasn't judging you," I assured her. "Our choices were just different. Still are neither better nor worse, just different." Madison nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that. It's going to take some getting used to, though." "For both of us," I agreed. Before she left that afternoon, we made a plan. Addison would meet with my financial advisor the following week. I'd already texted him, and he'd agreed to take her as a client at a reduced rate. She would start tracking her spending using the app I'd shown her. And we would meet again in 2 weeks to review her progress. As she gathered her paperwork, Madison paused at the door. "Thank you, Amber. Not just for the help, but for giving me another chance. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd told me to get lost after how I've behaved." "That's not who I am," I said simply. "And I think we're both still figuring out who you are beyond the image you've been projecting." She surprised me with a genuine hug, the kind we hadn't shared since we were children. "I think I'd like to find out," she said. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a cautious optimism blooming. The road ahead would undoubtedly have bumps, but for the first time in our adult lives, Madison and I seemed to be moving toward understanding rather than competition. And that was something I hadn't dared to hope for. 3 months later, on a crisp December evening, I stood on my parents' front porch with Jake beside me, a bottle of wine in one hand and a homemade apple pie in the other. Inside, lights glowed warmly against the early winter darkness, and I could hear the murmur of voices and soft holiday music. "Ready for this?" Jake asked, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze. I took a deep breath, as ready as I'll ever be. First Wilson family Christmas with my outspoken new self. The door swung open before I could knock, revealing my father in a festive sweater. "There you are, come in, it's freezing out there." He ushered us inside, taking our coats and the wine. "And you must be Jake, good to finally meet you, son." The living room was transformed with the familiar decorations of my childhood, the artificial tree covered in decades of accumulated ornaments, the nativity scene on the mantel, garland wrapped around the stair banister, but something felt different. The energy in the house had shifted somehow. Mom emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Amber, Jake, you made it." She embraced me warmly, then pulled back to look at Jake. "We've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Jake replied with his easy smile. "Nothing but," Mom assured him. "Amber tells us you took your debate team to state finals last year. That's impressive." As Jake launched into a story about his students, I glanced around the room, noting who was present. Uncle Steve and Aunt Patricia were chatting by the fireplace. Cousin Rachel and her husband were helping their children hang stockings. And there, arranging appetizers on the coffee table, was Madison. She looked different from how I remembered her at previous holiday gatherings. Gone were the flashy designer clothes and statement jewelry. Instead, she wore a simple red sweater and dark jeans. Her hair was styled in loose waves rather than the sleek blowout she'd favored before. But the most noticeable change was in her demeanor, more relaxed, less performative. She looked up and caught my eye, offering a genuine smile before coming over to greet us. "Hey Amber," she said, giving me a quick hug, "and you must be Jake. I'm Madison, the reformed terrible sister." Jake laughed. "Nice to meet you. Amber's told me a lot about you." "Oh God," Madison groaned. "I can only imagine, but I promise I'm on my best behavior these days." "She actually is," I confirmed, smiling at my sister. "Madison's made some pretty impressive changes these past few months." It wasn't just small talk. In the 3 months since our post-Thanksgiving reconciliation, Madison had taken significant steps to turn her life around. She'd sold her luxury condo and moved into a modest apartment. She'd traded in her leased BMW for a used Honda not unlike my own. She'd worked with a credit counselor to consolidate her debt and was faithfully following the budget we'd created together. But beyond the financial changes, she'd made efforts to repair our relationship. Weekly coffee meetups, honest conversations about our childhood and the patterns we'd fallen into. Even a few sessions with my therapist, Dr. Keller, who had suggested family therapy for the two of us. It hadn't all been smooth sailing. We'd had disagreements and setbacks. Old habits occasionally resurfaced. But the difference was that now we could talk about these things directly instead of letting resentment fester. Dinner that evening was a testament to the changing family dynamic. Mom had made her traditional turkey with all the trimmings, but the conversation around the table felt more balanced than I could ever remember. When Madison spoke about her work, she didn't exaggerate or dominate the conversation. When I shared news about a promotion at my marketing firm, my parents asked thoughtful questions instead of quickly changing the subject. Even more surprisingly, when the topic turned to finances during a discussion about rising property taxes, Madison openly referenced her past mistake. "I learned the hard way what happens when you prioritize appearances over actual financial health," she said matter-of-factly. Thankfully, Amber helped me understand that living within your means isn't about deprivation, it's about freedom. She raised her glass in my direction. "To my financially wise little sister, whose cheapskate ways I've come to deeply respect. I might not be here if not for her." The table fell silent for a moment, everyone remembering the tension of Thanksgiving. Then Jake lifted his glass. "To Amber, who's taught me a thing or two about intentional spending as well." Others joined in, and I felt my cheeks flush with pleased embarrassment. "You guys stop, I'm no financial guru." "Maybe not," Madison said, "but you know what matters. That's worth more than any finance degree." After dinner, as the family dispersed around the house, Madison and I found selves looking through old photo albums in the den, page after page of childhood memories, birthday parties, dance recitals, family vacations, school events. Look at us, Madison mused, pointing to a photo of us as teenagers at the beach, arms around each other's shoulders. What happened to those girls? Life happened, I replied. Expectations, competition, insecurity. Madison nodded thoughtfully. You know, I was thinking about it the other day. I think I started putting you down right around the time I started feeling like I couldn't keep up with my own expectations for myself. Like if I could make you the focus of everyone's disappointment, no one would notice my failure. That's pretty insightful, I said, genuinely impressed by her self-awareness. Therapy is expensive, but apparently effective, she replied with a wry smile. Who knew? We laughed together, and it struck me how natural it felt, this easy camaraderie that had been absent for so long. We've got a long way to go, I acknowledged, but this is a good start, isn't it? The best, Madison agreed. I'm actually looking forward to the future for the first time in years. Like, genuinely excited about building something real instead of just an image. Later that evening, as Jake and I drove back to Boston with Christmas music playing softly on the radio, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. You're quiet, Jake observed. Everything okay? More than okay, I assured him. I was just thinking about how much has changed since Thanksgiving, about the lessons I've learned. Care to share? He asked. I gathered my thoughts. I think the biggest one is that setting boundaries doesn't have to mean ending relationships. For so long, I was afraid to speak up because I thought confrontation would destroy my family. But actually, honest confrontation was what our relationship needed. That's profound, Jake said. What else? That financial responsibility isn't weakness, it's strength. Madison used to make me feel like my careful spending was something to be embarrassed about. Now she sees it as wisdom. Jake nodded. Anything else? That understanding someone's insecurities helps you process their hurtful actions. Not excuse them, but understand them, and that makes forgiveness possible. You're pretty amazing, you know that, Jake said, taking my hand across the console. I smiled. I'm just figuring it out as I go, like everyone else. Family relationships are always works in progress, I think. They evolve and change as we do. As we pulled up to my apartment building, snowflakes began to drift lazily from the night sky, the first snow of the season. We sat for a moment, watching the gentle flurries illuminated by the streetlight. One last thought, I said softly. Standing up for yourself might be uncomfortable in the moment, but in the long run, it earns respect both from others and from yourself. That night, as I drifted off to sleep in my cozy apartment with Jake beside me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The future held no guarantees. Madison might struggle to maintain her new habits, my parents might slip into old patterns, and I might find myself challenged to maintain boundaries. But something fundamental had shifted in our family system, creating space for authenticity and growth. And that was worth more than any amount of money could buy. How about you? Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who constantly put you down? What happened when you did? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found this journey helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating difficult family dynamics. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-respect that can ultimately lead to healthier relationships. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey toward authentic connections with those you love.